Yeah, I'm recording
We'll
too.
keep on going.
I'm recording too, if that's okay too. Just let everybody know.
I'm not really sure who's talking there. I'm sorry, we've got so many people online. Sorry to say something. Okay, well, look, we'll keep punching forward. It is a bit challenging here because we've got a lot of people online. I just want to cover housekeeping if we can. Look, if people do have a question, we can please just raise hand. That is in the top of your menu bar. One thing is important is to remember to hand again to also any questions. We could please identify yourself with your name, and obviously just help. I want to provide a little before I hand over to Stephen. Firstly, I want to say, ideally, we would have loved a lot more time. We do appreciate that clubs were notified quite late. There was a whole range of reasons for that. Some of them certainly were in the control of the WIA, but unfortunately, many of them were beyond our control, particularly when you go off to market and you start dealing with a whole range of underwriters and you start getting back a whole range of different responses. Unfortunately, that takes time. Also, and I'm going to leave this to Stephen, but to touch on very briefly that a lot of underwriters are very confused by amateur radio and what it means. It took a little while to make sure that, we correctly articulated to the underwriters through Stephen the activities of amateur radio operation. And there's so many different ones that vary from club to club to club. The idea of the policy was to, from a wholesale perspective, to address the majority. We completely acknowledge that there always was going to be a couple of clubs which might have found it a little bit challenging, and there might have been a few areas that we needed to address, but certainly the arrangement was to try and address, as I said, the majority of clubs and club activities. Stephen, I might at this point pass over to you. I mean, we're going to, not off tonight, but, everything's on the table. We want to talk about, what's in, what's out, what's good, areas that we might need to potentially still work on. So, Stephen, can I hand over to you?
Yeah. My name's Stephen from Gips Insure. I've been in the industry for 27 years. 15 of them as an underwriter, and the rest as a broker. And so this is nothing new to me as I say this, but obviously with something like this, there is always something new every day. And before I do start, there is something I just need to read out. It's basically a disclaimer, because in this situation, I am the broker. And so I'm not the insurer, not the legal person. We're just going to review, from my understanding today, the general liability PVS and the schedule, and give an insight into the application and help navigate and interpret the coverage. Okay. And so, look, this is not legal or personal advice. It's just general overview of the policy, and to help give an understanding of how the policy will apply and what we need to be looking at from our perspective. That's mine and yours. Okay. Right, Scott was right. When I first looked at this, I sat down and I feel as if it's been a discovery moment for me. The last 3 months has been a roller coaster for me, and it's been an eye-opening experience. From what I assumed you guys were doing to what you were actually doing seemed to be completely different. I say not completely different. There was obviously a bit more involved. Okay, and the underwriter, we applied to the underwriter with the information we had at hand at the time, and the underwriter accepted that information and provided us with said cover. Okay. And then off we go. And then obviously in the piece, as we're probably aware of, there has been some roadblocks, obviously roadblocks along the road, which puts us in this position where we are today, where there are going to be a lot of questions that are going to come out. Okay, I'm wondering where to start the moment. Can I just when we talk about, because there are going to be a lot of questions about how the policy applies, and look, this could be pretty boring stuff, and it could be quite complicated stuff sometimes as well. But in a nutshell, when we come to this type of cover, we are covered Australia-wide. I'll give you, in a nutshell, say we are covered Australia-wide in connection with what we do, as described on the policy schedule or somewhere else, or in the application, less the exclusions on the policy cover, okay? So what I see, okay, if everybody's still with me on this, what I see when I looked at this from my original conversation was a list of activities that were involved, okay? And those activities were meetings, symposiums, there were swap meets, and there were swap meets, sausage sizzles, and basically that was it. I would imagine that's all I can remember at the time. And then so we proposed that to the insurance company.
Base, mute left pit.
Yeah, hello.
Brian Young left parent guest right parent joined the call.
Sorry.
Sorry, Steve. Keep going. There was somebody unmuted there with noise, but we'll keep going. Thank you.
Yeah. So look, I can, as far as the policy cover is concerned, I feel as if, Scott, we should just jump into the questions first, and I think the policy coverage will possibly open itself up when we go into the questions. So do you think that we should just dive into them and then just take it from there? Because I do feel, because it doesn't have any context without the questions being applied.
Yeah, I agree, Stephen. Look, many of the questions that we've actually received have a very, very common thread to them as well. So I think that although we might not specifically get to every single question, I think you'll find many of the actual answers will be contained within probably the first couple. So, Steve, maybe let me lead you firstly where I guess a lot of feedback has come, particularly from clubs who have towers and antennas located at club rooms, but also have potentially site assets off-site, such as repeaters and beacons, but then also go out to contests, field days, parks operation, and may erect antennas and towers. And you and I have had a lot of discussion about this, Stephen. So there's lots of questions about, am I covered? Am I not covered? What's covered? So let's step through this, Stephen. Maybe we can just firstly talk about the club room. And there's many different scenarios of club rooms, but the most common probably is a council-owned or a community-owned club room of which the clubs operate. And they're required to demonstrate that they have public liability insurance. That varies from 10 to 20 million. And obviously, though, there's a range of activities that take place in the club, at the club room. So do you firstly just want to talk about that? Because there's many questions that are in relation to this.
Right. As I alluded to earlier, the policy covers you Australia-wide in connection with what you do. So basically, you look at the business description and what underwriting information that's underlying under that business description. As long as you stick in the confines of that, the information that's on the application form, then you're okay. Obviously, you need to take into consideration the exclusions. Okay, generally I run through the exclusions and I go, okay, then how would they apply? Would they be an issue for this client? And generally you look at it, you go, okay, generally you look at the stuff you're doing, straightforward stuff covered.
All right, so let me then be devil's advocate if I can.
Yeah, please.
Because I'm sure there's lots of people around this screen which have probably got a similar question. So you've got a club room and you've got a tower. Obviously, we do not recommend in any way or form that people go climbing towers, but the towers are able to be, in many cases, cranked over to gain access to antennas. And there are activities relating to those antennas, replacing them, upgrading and maintaining them, and I'm sorry, I'm just muted myself because I'm in the Melbourne airport. So in the event that somebody from the public walked by, Steve, and there was some sort of incident, I don't know, they tripped over a lead, something happened, Stephen, how would the policy respond?
First of all,
Would it respond?
the first component of the policy would be, is there negligence there? And the first part of your policy would be defence. Okay, so somebody would have to put a claim in against you, then you would notify me that there was a claim. Now, the insurance company would set that up as a claim and they would investigate that claim. They would investigate that claim and defend that claim the way they see fit. They would look at it from top to bottom. There may be a case where there isn't any liability. There isn't a negligent liability exposure there, but it's their job to notify and to deal with that claim anyway. The scenario could be lightning could strike and something could happen as a result of that, which is not your issue. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't stop a third party from going you. And that's why the cover is there to defend that case anyway. So there's two sides of the coin, whether it's covered or not. The insurance company is their job to say, we are liable or we're not liable. If we're liable, they defend it and they deal with it. If they say that we're not liable, they still defend it. And it's their job to deal with it. And I would see where they see it needs to be done. There's a lot of technical stuff that does come into play when it comes to liability. It's a specialist field in itself. I had a colleague remind me yesterday, we was talking about this webinar, and he said, remember the fact, he said, you don't get underwriters talking about claims because they don't know. They say you need to speak to claims department. It's funny when there's the underwriter who's the salesperson, but that's the way you look at it when it comes to liability. You need to speak to a claims person because they deal in this industry. They deal with the claims. They have more insight than anybody, whether there's going to be a claim or whether there's not. So there is some technical stuff that really comes into play, and then you get the solicitors involved. So it's a minefield. But the way you're talking, the main thing is, Scott, that it's the insurance company's job to look at it and investigate it and defend it, and see where it needs to go.
So Steve, I want to narrow in if I can. I understand all of that. There's a lot of considerations, but I guess, president, vice president, secretaries that are on this board, I guess want to have some sort of peace of mind that in the event that an incident occurs, that there's coverage in place from a public liability perspective. So I now want to come to club members, which are WIA members, and club members which are non-WIA members. Okay, because there's several questions around this. So Stephen, in the event of those club members working on or participating, viewing a tower and antennas being taken up or down, let's just say that accidentally a spanner is dropped, it ricochets, off the ground and hits somebody. I know I'm exaggerating here. And there's some sort of claim that's made against the club as a consequence of that, either first a WIA club member and then second a non-member. Could you just talk how the policy might or might not respond in that regard?
To me, if they're negligent, it would respond.
Yes. Okay.
You look at,
and that's the answer.
Again, you look at the policy, you say, is it excluded under the policy? If it's not excluded under the policy and it's included, okay, under the business definition of what they should be doing, then it would respond.
Yep. Alrighty.
Graham Carter here.
Let's
can I ask a question, please? Graham Carter.
I'll take it, Greg, but just Graham, if you could just in future put your hand up, it's all right, but Graham will take the question. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I didn't see how Stephen's response addressed your question there, Scott. I didn't see the answer. It was relevant to your question. Your question was about whether members say, club members working on site, some of whom may be WIA members and some not. If an incident occurred and a claim was made, is the WIA member status of the person involved relevant or not? Which I hadn't thought of, but it's a very important question, and I thank you for raising it.
So I can just repeat Stephen's response, and that is the policy would respond under negligence. Stephen, irrespective of being a WIA member or being a non-WIA club member, if there is a claim against the club and there was negligence, the policy would respond. Is that correct,
Yeah,
Steve?
yeah, that's correct. It doesn't distinguish between member and non-member.
Okay, thanks. That's the key point. Doesn't distinguish between members and non-members. That's it. Thank you.
Correct.
Yes,
And
sorry,
this was the
sorry, Scott and Steve,
Yeah.
just hold on a second. We're just having some participants having some issues with audio, so I think we are sucking up a fair bit of bandwidth here. For those who don't need their cameras, could you please turn your cameras off? Just keep yours on so we can see your lovely dial. Okay, please continue. Sorry, Scott. Sorry for the interruption.
All right. Yeah, No, I saw a few messages with people saying they were having some audio chopping issues. That might have been it. So, all right, so look, that's one. So, Stephen, I'd now like to lead you offside. Important activity of many clubs is obviously they have various activities. That can be things from contests, from field days, swap meets, as we've said before, a range of activities that take place offsite. And see those activities, my understanding is exactly the same as before, irrespective of being a club member, a non-club member, a Wireless Institute of Australia member of a club, a non-WIA member of the club, or in fact, if it's a member of the public. If there was negligence from an activity, correct, Stephen?
Scott?
Have we lost Stephen?
Yeah, sorry, no, I'm here. You're just breaking up. I caught very little of that. I think David was right. It was about negligence. It was about an event, and I missed a lot of it.
Okay, I'll just go again, Stephen. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to turn my camera off just for bandwidth as well. So, Stephen, can you hear me okay at the moment?
Yes.
Okay. So my question was, there's a lot of activities that take place off-site, field days, swap meets, contests, operations in parks, and irrespective of if it is a WIA member of the club, a non-WIA member of the club, or in fact it is a member of the public, my understanding is the policy will respond in the area of negligence because, again, it's an Australia-wide policy. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, it's an Australia. Yeah, territorial limits Australia-wide. That's correct. But I just got lost on your coverage. The person is intending to cover the club and the member of the club for negligent acts to third parties. Okay, and that third party could be a visitor to that event. You mentioned, yeah.
And then answer the question, because that visitor to the event is a member of the public, and again, that in the case of some negligence that's occurred, the policy would respond.
That's right, because they were the people who would make a claim against you effectively.
Correct. Alrighty, the next one, Steve, I want to lead you to, and hopefully you can hear me okay, is to beacons and to repeaters where, clubs have, some clubs have equipment located off-site, and that can be everything from private land to, in fact, a commercial site, which there could be a lease arrangement or some share arrangement with equipment. And I know, Steve, that you've had lots and lots and lots of questions in this regard.
Yeah, so what is your question? So
My question is about liability, and in the event of negligence that occurs. So a club member is on that beacon or on that repeater site, and again does something whereby that it results in a potential claim under a PL policy for negligence. Would the policy respond?
well, I would say yes. I would go back to what when it comes to the policy and Keystone, who were the applicable underwriters here, I go back to what they don't allow in. And from my consideration, and that is in relation to, they specifically noted the installation, and in the conversation was installation and commercial communication sites. So I go from my interpretation of that, that is an in. They had the opportunity to broaden that. They haven't broadened that. That's what they came up with. And all the question they ask is about installation, the word installation on commercial communication sites.
Okay. Yeah, so look, there's quite a few questions related to this, and I now want to talk about doing maintenance and doing repairs, Steve, on those beacons and repeaters, particularly from the point of working at heights, because there's certainly been many concerns in that area, and I understand, Steve, if I'm right, the policy or the underwriter has had concern in that area. Is that right?
Look, from their concern is mostly to do with it's not within their vision of what a club should be. That was their concern. There's been a number of companies I've gone to who have put that proposal forward and said, look, they don't like the idea, but that's just their point of view at the end of the day. Is it a risk? Yes, there is. It's a volunteer risk. It's a risk of death. But it wasn't from Keystone. I'm not sure if that's the answer you're looking for. Please.
Yeah, no, it sort of is, because we've had many clubs which in the past have, excuse me. Alrighty, just lost that announcement. So we've had quite a few clubs in the past which have climbed towers, undertaken work on antennas, coaxes, connectors, and questions have been raised like, what happens if I'm up the tower and I drop a spanner and it, lands on the top of or lodges itself into a battery bank, and as a consequence starts a fire? I guess the first thing would be, Stephen, that should club members climb the tower? Obviously, there is working at heights requirements, and then the other side of it is, from a public liability perspective, to what extent does the PL policy extend to when they're undertaking such activities as climbing towers and doing work off-site? Will it respond?
I am thinking about it because
Might be a question on notice, you think, for the underwriter?
It is. It's one that I've talked to them in great detail with, and many underwriters as well. And there are many answers to this. Would it be covered? Some look, you and I have had this conversation, Scott. It's something, should I be, and the question was, I'll share it with everybody else, is should I as the broker be the underwriter, or should it be down to the underwriter to be making the decisions on this? And from my perspective, if it's not included in the risk activity or the events or the activities of the club, then technically it's not covered. But the insurance company is not telling us that. The insurance company is quite correctly stating that they don't like installation on commercial communication sites. That is a different thing. So so the insurance company there with Keystone, that's all they're concerned with. We've sent in the applications. They pulled out the ones they didn't like, unfortunately, and that's what they said. And it's all to do with installation on commercial communication sites.
So, Steve, can I just ask, because I know there has been a few clubs which have been rejected for that activity. So, and you're using the language installation. So is it just a language issue, a language issue in the description of the activity? Is it then, if it was a repair activity or a maintenance activity and not considered to be installation, then the underwriter wouldn't have a problem? Is that what you're saying?
From my experience in this field, this is something that could end up in a court, and it would be on the word that's used.
Yep.
And I would say it's the way they use the words. I mean, it's where the commas are, where the full stops are. And that's what, when stuff like this ends the courts, they rely on what question did you ask? Did the client answer the question correctly? And that's what it's down to. Sorry, Scott.
Sorry, it's Graham Carter again. I just have to
sorry, Graham.
butt in there. But if I climb a tower, theoretical, to put up a new antenna, that would be, in a technical sense, installation work. We're putting in something new. It's something that wasn't there before. If I climb a tower to take down one that's damaged, been bent or twisted, that's not strictly, to a technical person, installation work. We're repairing an existing item. You might take down the old one or do something up there. So that fine distinction that the underwriter seems to be making between installation work, putting up a new item on a tower, and some kind of repair work, from a technical point of view, this person goes up tower, does work, but the underwriter seems to be happy to cover one and then totally avoid the other. And I really don't think waiting till it goes to court is a satisfactory answer.
Graham, I'm totally with you on it. That's what we have from them. Could we get any more further comment from them? No. We've sought further comment from them, didn't get it. It seems to be stuck in that rut. And so we have this situation, and everybody has this. Do we accept what it is, or do we move on? And I'm totally with you, Graham, on this. If everybody's doing the same, and this is what they've given us, where does it leave us as a group?
Precisely. The other one is, we, speaking for Crack in Canberra, we have 3 repeater sites. 2 of them are government installations, one's federal, one's state, and we have equipment on a 3rd site, which is commercial. So again, reading that, if it only covers commercial sites, then 2 out of 3 of our repeater sites would not be covered. They're not commercial.
Yeah, on a separate note, Graham, we have sought separate, we have gone to different underwriters and taken a different approach, where the other underwriters have gone the route of, they've taken a liking to the fact that the clubs are doing the risk management, are doing the work and being able to look after the stuff, which is a totally different response to where the current ones are. Unfortunately, with obviously digressing you a little bit, but unfortunately, the club that said they would do this don't like to do events. So you're gaining something, you're losing something else. But it's certainly, look, Graham, it's certainly something that needs sorting out. You're right.
Yeah.
Just while my mic's open, I'll throw in the 3rd one, and that was that when we discussed this with you in the early days, your underwriter completely rejected the idea of volunteers going up towers and insisted we had to use contractors. Now, for one of our sites that's about an hour and a half's drive out of Canberra, If we had to hire a team of contractors to go down there and back for a day to do something, that would be our entire club's income about twice over for 1 year. It's just completely out of the question.
Graham, noted. I'm totally with you. Unfortunately, some people live in their ivory towers and in the big cities and don't understand what it's like in the real world. Yeah, totally understand.
Just a quick question for Graham. Are the volunteers licensed riggers?
Good question. I think we have 1 or 2 in the club. We've never checked the details before. They certainly have arrest harnesses and all the good stuff. But I couldn't say that they're licensed riggers.
I'm just going to pull everybody up there just because I'm just trying to moderate this with people jumping in and calls. And Graham, thank you. You've got some really good questions there. Look, Steve, I know the underwriter, and we've had this discussion, has expressed great concern regarding people working at heights. And the minute you get over, sort of 2 meters, we're talking about, individuals needing to obviously have a working at heights. They're subject to the height. There can be tower rescue requirements. There's requirements about just owning a harness doesn't mean the harness is suitable. Harnesses must be inspected yearly. Now on the call, and we might just sort of flip over to Steve just for a couple of minutes if we can. Steve Kennedy, I saw you on the call. Steve, can you hear me okay? Have I caught him by surprise? Hello, Steve Kennedy.
Yeah, I was just finding my mouse. Yeah, I'm here.
Now,
there's a few others as well that are also in that.
Yeah. And the reason, Steve, I guess I'm not trying to pick on you, but you do this for a living. And Steve, I listened to an audio recording and I think you just what do they call it over in WA? You just did what do you call that, Steve? You just did something recently on this subject.
An article I do every week, and it just happened to be on working at heights and just getting people thinking about the qualifications. And some of the things that you need to think about.
Yeah. Do you want to just give everybody just a minute or two, Steve, just about the requirements that are placed on you as a business to work more than 2 meters off the ground? Do you want to just quickly talk about this, Steve?
Yeah, I could probably do it in a minute or so.
Okay, a minute's good.
Yeah, and there's probably plenty of people. I can see a few people in here that would know that already. So I'm certainly not the only one. But I mean, as soon as you go over 2 meters, yes, you're looking at working at heights. As soon as you you can operate an EWP in Western Australia anyway. May not be the case elsewhere without a ticket. Although working at heights, if you're doing it for a business, then working at heights would be required for that as well. And then there's elevated work platform tickets that you need to go above 11 meters. For rigging, the requirement is that you need to have a plan for getting someone down if they're in trouble. To work on a tower, you need more than working at heights. Obviously, you do need at very, very least a basic rigging ticket, and that only allows you to do certain things. It's the sort of thing a technician might have to be able to replace a connector or something like that. And then you need to, as soon as you start doing work on a tower, you really need to be an intermediate or advanced rigger, depending on the task. You've got to have a plan for getting people down in a time frame that's useful, which generally means that you've got to have a means to get someone down as soon as an incident occurs, not when some sort of rescue authority turns up. So, and that generally means something like someone at the bottom who's got a tower rescue kit and tower rescue qualifications. That's a snapshot of it. There's a lot more involved in it. And with a club, I would suggest that a club is probably in a very similar position to a business in terms of the requirements, and certainly from a safety perspective. Everyone wants all their members to go home in the same manner that they arrived. You would probably want to be doing all of that as well. So you know, if your club can't afford riggers to do work, and there's no one in the club who's qualified to do it, I'd be, I guess you'd be looking, well, that's an expense of running a site that has a tower. You obviously need to look at things like tilt over towers and things that you can work on the ground. That's about all I got to say about it.
Yeah, do you just want to cover, Steve, just very quickly, was I right about the harnesses, Steve, where a harness needs to be inspected every single time of use? There is a requirement that the harness yearly and replacement after a period, and
there's a time limit. I can't remember off the top of my head, but harnesses should be inspected yearly, but in reality, it should really be inspected by the user every time he uses it. I think the inspection yearly should be an advanced rigger from memory. I'm not a rigger. I have employed riggers in the very recent past, but not anymore.
All right. Well, look, Steve, it's a good overview. And look, you know, we're not trying to frighten people. We're just trying to deal with the reality today that underwriters, they're not silly. They're dealing with people all the time that are working in heights through all sorts of different professions. And Steve, you know, as much as we acknowledge, you know, Graham's issue around this remote site and access, but the underwriter's probably response is, well, that's fine, but we don't want to take the risk for that. I know it's a cost impost to your club, and it's a great inconvenience to go to try and find somebody, but what is the actual, what's the upside to it for the underwriter? And they would say there's no upside to it.
Well, we have found an underwriter that would do it.
Yeah, and there are underwriters that will do it, but that comes at a cost.
Well,
and
for the record, we went back to the same one we dealt with last year, and she was happy to do it.
And Graham, do you mind me asking? I know we've had this discussion personally, you and I think it was a little bit under $1,000. Was that right, Graham?
I don't remember talking to you direct, but yeah, the figure was we had paid about $650, $660 2 years ago, and the figure was just under $1,000 for the renewal this year. That's correct.
Yeah. I thought, was it you, Graham, I spoke to at the AGM about this? No,
there's another Graham. We have multiple.
Yeah, okay.
Grahams.
There was another Graham I spoke to
yes,
exactly
indeed,
about this. Yes, it was the other Graham, and you know, so you know, we're talking about here, you know, the WIA PL policy, which is a couple of $100. You know, maybe a couple of hundred more for the larger clubs, but we're talking about here just one specific activity, and Graham, the club has needed to go away and pay near $1,000 to cover that risk. So, so I guess, Steve, back to you, but I guess the policy that we have in the PDS, and Steve, you'll correctly remind everybody that you must read the schedule in context with the PDS, is that there are limitations, Steve. And do you want to talk about some of those limitations? Because one of them, Steve, and I want to lead now to where there is a limit on the maximum amount of people, but then there is just an endorsement that needs to be sought if it exceeds that amount of people. Do you want to talk to that point, Steve?
Yeah, it's basically there to control the pricing on the policy, and the cover is to show some control. We went to the underwriter and said, yeah, this is a myriad of things we're going to do. And it was a number of questions came back. How many numbers do you have? We didn't have the numbers, so many people. And they said, look, if we want to control it, cap it, control the costing on it, let's keep it to 250. Doesn't mean that they won't look at more. They said, we just want to know about it. We want to know what's happening, how it's happening, who's involved, and so we can just underwrite it properly and make sure we can control the risk.
Yep.
Is that members per club? Was that the number of members in each club, Steve?
No, that was it didn't state, it's just persons attending.
Oh, a person's attending an event.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
At a particular event. So just Steve, again, you do have a club which has sought an increase on those numbers up to 500, And by memory, Steve, it was about $100. Was that right?
It was, yeah, I'm sure it was. It was about $100 plus taxes. Could be,
Yep.
it could be $150, something like that.
Yep.
For I can't remember, maybe 1,000. I don't know. It was a swap meet. It was. There's a lot of things that I guess you don't know until you do know, and what the policy is there to cover you for. And like I said, it's a discovery moment for me as well. What was involved in the swap meet, as much as I knew, you kind of don't know. And there was secondhand gear that was turning up and which was being sold, and it was no intention to the club thinking that they were looking for cover for that. But there is an exposure for that because it's happening at the meet. Okay, so the insurance company would look at it and go, okay, then do we want to include it or do we exclude it? If we want to include it, it'll cost more. But let's just exclude it. And the clubs are going, well, okay, then should we? And if we start selling stuff secondhand gear, it changes us from a club to something different. And then the pricing factor of that goes through the roof. But there was a lot of things that came out from that conversation we need to be aware of.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I guess I just want to come back to Steve's point before. We could have easily included 500 people. Steve, we could have made it 1,000 people, but that just meant that premiums for everybody would have been based off that. So your proposal to the underwriter was trying to go with the majority, and the majority of clubs, and I think, Steve, we've got maybe 4 or 5 clubs which might be in a position that could exceed 250, but obviously the majority, and I'm talking about the other 90 plus, you know, are well and truly under 250. In fact, the majority are probably well and truly under 100.
Yeah.
Okay, so alrighty, I'm going to keep going. One of the other
Just
things
to throw in a clarification, if I could, sorry to be rude again. The buying and selling of second-hand equipment, I think you would be more logically argued that it would be a gathering of people who got together to buy and sell equipment amongst each other. I don't think many clubs would actually be in the business of buying and selling equipment themselves.
Yeah, I think that's you, Graham. Yeah, I think I've learned that as well. Because of the qualifications and the people involved and the type of equipment, you live and you learn, I guess. Yes, it's
Call it a car boot sale for amateurs. Yes.
But yeah, but I think there is this thing as well. I'll just finish this piece off, where it can become a battle between maybe one club against another. So you get, who both got their individual liability covers, but come together and you're buying from one club is buying from another. So you could have a grey area there where there could be an exposure. But I'm with you, Graham. Yeah, it's something I've learned.
All right. So just to wrap that discussion out, because we'll move on to the next one, is that if you do exceed 250 people at any event at all, or you think you are, you simply need to just contact Stephen and seek an additional extension or endorsement, if that's the right word, Stephen.
That's right.
Where you will go to the underwriter, you will explain the circumstances, how many people, and you will get a price back. That's pretty much how it works. Am I right, Stephen?
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. Stephen, one of the things that's been raised was obviously around balloon launches. And this has been a really problematic area because there's only, I think, a couple of clubs that undertake this activity. And I guess, Stephen, the underwriter just doesn't like it at all, do they? Do you want to expand on that, Stephen?
Well, from my experience, no underwriter likes it.
Yep.
Look, and I did see Peter, and I've seen the obviously we've had discussions, and I do see the applicable PDS, where it has what's called a right back cover for balloons. But what I will say is that the PDS needs to be read in conjunction with the policy schedule. Okay, the one thing that is missing, that I'll say this, which doesn't help anybody at all, is the way, and some, I think it was Craig Johnson who also mentioned as well, is the business description, because the business description is possible. The way I see it is a very polished version of what it really should be. Okay, Now, if I hope I'm not losing anybody, under that business description is a proposal that would have gone to the underwriter, okay? And in that proposal, it would have had things like events, symposiums, barbecues, and it would have had a list of things that would have happened at these clubs. Unfortunately, the one thing for me is I don't know what was on the previous one. Okay, because I wasn't privy to the previous application. I didn't think it was relevant going forward anyway. So without that information, so what I'm saying here, Peter, is if you're on, is yeah, there is a difference in the PDS, but it doesn't mean it's covered just because there's a condition in the policy that writes back balloon cover. Generally, from my experience, is when you deal with stuff like weather balloons and stuff like that, it's the fact if an underwriter would look at it and they would charge you proportionately for what it is. I've spoke to a number of underwriters in relation to balloons, and it's very out there stuff, especially since the China issue with the balloons. Nobody is interested in looking at it at all. Well, sorry, there was one, but it's all about getting volume business. It's so the thing is with this, and so I do look at the policy wording. Look, it is different in that aspect, but does it mean it's covered? I can't comment on that because I don't see the application form that was previously used.
Okay. There was another question there I think we've answered about the amount of attendees, so I'm just going through these one by one. Sorry, is there another question from somebody?
Yeah, just Peter, just a couple of things popping up around, probably misunderstanding about the WIA's role with this process.
Yep.
So in the old days, the clubs would deal direct with Ted Thrift, clubs coordinator, and money would be gathered on behalf of the broker and consolidated and paid in one premium. And now we've changed things. So Scott, if you just want to speak to that just briefly, I think that will clear a few things up.
Yeah, look, you know, I guess like all organisations, we undertake our own risk assessments from a board perspective, and we do that on behalf of the members. And we were not comfortable, and we sought advice on this, but we were not comfortable that the WIA was acting as almost like a middle person where we were obviously going out, collecting data from clubs. We were obviously paying for the insurance. We were then invoicing and collecting money from the clubs. And part of that difficulty was as well is it set a precedent that we were in a position where people were coming to us and seeking advice all the time. And we've tried to make this clear over a long period of time that, you know, the WIA doesn't provide financial advice. We don't provide insurance advice. And we tried to make that, you know, fairly clear. One of the other things too that seemed to happen over a period of time is that I think people just sort of trusted and sort of said, well, gee, well, the WIA is doing all this in the background, so it must be right. Everything must be insured. I've had clubs tell me that, no, everything was insured. You know, the equipment was covered, everything was insured. And I'm going, no, it's not. And what we found very quickly was that, you know, people were not reading the product disclosure statements. They weren't reading the schedules, and but just assuming that there was coverage in a whole range of areas where there wasn't coverage. So look, there has been a couple of bumps along the way here. We absolutely acknowledge that. But today, you know, I can put my hand on the heart, and Steve, you're here on this call. Yeah. We have a far better product. It is more fit for purpose. Steve is having these discussions directly with every club, and that's a very positive thing. And yes, sometimes Steve doesn't give you the answers that you want. And there's a reasoning behind that because, you know, Steve's in the business of placing insurance, and the underwriters are certainly in the business of also writing business, but it's all about the risk. And I guess that's a long way in saying that we didn't believe the old arrangement was sustainable. It was also taking around 2 months of Bruce's time in the national office I'll just remind everybody we have one person, and there's lots of things that we need to improve upon. And Bruce's core business is not going out there trying to arrange insurance for clubs. But what we wanted to do was make sure that there was an arrangement in place and there was a conduit directly to a broker who could help our clubs with not just PL insurance, but any, in fact, insurances that they needed to cover in their club. So look, it's a long way in saying that we needed to move away from the old for a whole range of reasons. And we're not unhappy in any way what's happened. In fact, we're thrilled with what's happened, but we are challenged in a few areas where the underwriter has not necessarily responded to the level we thought they would have. And Steve, I don't want to put any words in your mouth or take anything away from you here. Am I fair to say, Stephen, that when we come to this time next year, and in fact earlier, when renewals, they happen at April, so probably in the February timeframe. And in fact, if I'm right, Stephen, you're already out there talking to other underwriters, and there will be a decision in the future if, in fact, we continue with the underwriter we have, or in fact, if we do transition to another underwriter, which will provide us better coverage again. Do you want to comment on that, Stephen? Or?
That's certainly true. I'm continuously talking to people. I'm still working on trying to get it all together into one piece with one underwriter. It's hard going, but the work's already in motion. It's not waiting until February, March, April. It's already going now.
Yeah, and I couldn't read all the comments that just came in. A couple did. I think we do have a couple of clubs online, Stephen, if we're right, whereby that the underwriter has not agreed to coverage. And in their view, Stephen, the underwriter, they've just viewed that the activities are of a level or a risk whereby I guess they just don't have an appetite. Would that be fair to say, Stephen?
Yeah, it certainly is. Well, yeah, definitely. They look at this. I believe that the underwriter, doesn't matter how much information I've sent them, I've looked at it and they viewed it same as any other club. Unfortunately, as I've discovered as well, and I could be guilty of this as well, of just being a bit naive. Yeah. And you just assume certain things, and I sat in an office and I just took so much in. And then it was only during conversation. And on that basis, they provide you with a pricing range. Of course, they'll give you a discount because you've got volume, but that's what they worked it on. And I bet my bottom dollar that that's what the previous underwriter would have done as well. It just seems to be very similar. But without information, I don't know. But yeah,
So Stephen, I can tell you that I've gone back personally and I've looked at many of the many of the activities described in the previous arrangement, and a lot of the activities of clubs today and their descriptions on the application are vastly different to the descriptions that were previously there. So I don't know why that is, if it's just simply because, Stephen, you're having these discussions with the clubs, and we obviously encourage all clubs to make full and proper declarations as to their activities, but there was definitely a lack of description of activities with the previous arrangement. Many clubs did not disclose all of their activities.
Yeah, I'm being a nuisance to myself. Unfortunately, I've got to ask the question because the worst thing, the way I see it, is when you do have a claim. Yeah. And there's nothing worse when you say, sorry, you're not coming in. Yeah. And then unfortunately, when you deal with a lot of underwriters, you ask a lot of questions and you ask a lot more questions, and it's annoying, I know, but you do need to know this stuff and you need to be relevant.
Yeah.
Up to date.
And Stephen, you're right. I mean, one thing is having coverage and the second one is having the policy respond. And the bad thing is we've never had a claim. We've never actually ever tested. Oh, let me mute myself 1 sec. All right, somebody was boarding. So we've never had to claim, and some would say that's a good thing. But the bad side of that is it hasn't been tested. So you actually then don't know if the policy would respond.
That's correct.
Okay.
Um,
We've got so many questions which sort of cross over. So I'm trying to summarize. Look, there's some issues that has arisen with some clubs which, Stephen, are not incorporated. And there's a couple in this position, if that's right. And the records internally at the WIA, unfortunately, are not to the level that tell us that which clubs are incorporated and or who is unincorporated, unless, of course, we went and searched every single club on the registers and started to identify that. So, Steve, legally and contractually, a unincorporated club cannot enter into a contractual arrangement. Is that correct, Stephen?
Look, gotta forgive me, I'm not the accountant and I'm not the
Yep.
legal person. From my experience, that's true. When you go to an underwriter, and it's an underwriter recognizes it straight away as well. Don't get me wrong, I didn't just take it and just let it lie. I pushed it on a number of insurance companies to see if we could still get the unincorporated over the line. Unfortunately, we only had one taker, but then it was still, there were still specific conditions that they need to abide by before they're allowed in. So yeah, it is. Like the guys I've come across, I've just, because it's not my field, I'm just relaying the information on. I'll push it forward to the insurance company and get what I can. Okay, and it stops with them and they go, sorry, contract cannot be signed because you're unincorporated. It's the words. And insurance is a contract.
And I guess then to follow on that I think we accept that because of the late announcement in March of this changeover, those couple of unincorporated clubs obviously then didn't have the time to seek incorporation. And I know some of the clubs are doing that. A couple of them actually, one of them rang me and spoke to me about it last week, who is physically going through that process and is becoming incorporated, which will then allow them to pursue the insurance. But I think we might only have 2 clubs in that position, if that's right, Steve. I think that's right. There's 2 clubs that might be in that that one position.
I can't remember. They were,
Yeah.
they were. I thought they were a few, but I can't remember. I know a couple of them have actually moved over and they've gone incorporated.
Yes.
Yeah. So went to see an accountant and sorted it out. So
Yes.
yeah. But there's
All right.
obviously the other thing as well we need to talk about is I feel as if there is something the conversation with the accountant needs to be made and with others as well, because they are personally liable, not the club as an individual. That was the biggest discovery moment, even for myself, in relation to this.
Yep. Now, am I right also, Steve, that, and I'm not trying to shift any blame here, but the underwriter put on additional resources to try and deal with the influx?
Yes.
But unfortunately, we found ourselves in a position where many applications that were submitted were incomplete. And
yes,
there was
yes.
a considerable amount of time and investment needed from your side, then trying to liaise with these clubs over and over to get the information, but without making excuses, unfortunately, that in fact slowed down and from your side, Steve, you had to in some cases shift your focus to those clubs that had completed their applications and needed the insurance to those clubs that hadn't completed all the application and you needed to work through them. Is that right?
Exactly. Look, I'll be honest. I honestly believe the form could have been put together better.
Yep.
I think there was stuff in there. We put in the too many questions, the volunteer stuff, and it was trying to do the better thing. for everybody to handle, and hindsight just tells me that it was complicated the you know the whole thing. Plus they were, you know, the way that the whole thing was designed. So look, yeah, there were questions missed and there was a lot of back and forth. Yes, it was lessons learned. Yeah, move on.
Okay, and those, that form, Steve, that came from the underwriter, but do you think that's also because they were a bit uncertain or unsure, so they were being overly cautious by asking probably a whole range of extra questions which maybe didn't need to be asked? Is that what you're saying?
Possibly. You find that a lot of people are brought in asking questions. You're right, and inexperience brings that, and you'd be surprised what you get back when you do bring them resources in. But I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Okay. Excuse me, coughing all the time. The next one, Steve, a couple of people have raised that the PDS covers products, and there was some question also around the language of volunteer. I don't know if I think it might have been in one of the questions, Steve, I sent through to you. So a couple of clubs said, we don't understand why that is included. But am I right to say, Steve, that the underwriters sort of have a standard offering and sometimes things like that are just there and included?
Yeah.
And you know, it's not really a case of negotiating with them to take things out. And even if they did take things out, it's not though that would have altered the price at all. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's only generally removed when they want to remove it.
Yeah.
And like we're at the bottom end. We're minimum premium kind of stuff, you know. So it's not going to make any difference. A lot of this stuff, because it costs more money to add an endorsement or make a change to a policy. Just because you want to reduce it doesn't mean it reduces the cost. All it does, it takes more labor, which costs more money because you can't just remove it.
Yeah,
Does
and
that
that's
make
probably
sense? It takes more people.
Well, that's probably the point I'm making, that their offering was I don't want to call it a pedestrian offering, but it was a fairly standard offering, and it wasn't boutique for every single club. And obviously, Steve, for us, there was a balance between, and I'm just reciting our conversation, Steve, but there was a balance between trying to get the coverage right and plug some of the gaps that existed from the previous, but then making sure that the premiums is something that's conducive where the clubs found that to be similar. In some cases, it was a little bit more. In some cases, it was a little bit less. But generally, I think it fared pretty well.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I'm with Scott. It was totally trying to get the right balance. You're right, and balance, effort, cover, all, and at the right cost.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I just saw a question pop up about a multi-level policy, but again, the difficulty is we're going to an underwriter with volume, saying, you know, we have 80, 90, 100 clubs that are going to do this, but then recognizing again what I said earlier on, there's probably a few clubs which, you know, do have activities outside. Now, Steve, there's been a couple of questions raised, and I've got a couple here in writing about, you know, does it cover our equipment and that? And obviously, Steve, the answer is it doesn't cover equipment. Yeah, so it doesn't cover equipment in any way or form. This is just public liability insurance. And I think one of the questions might have been specifically what happens that, you know, if I was working on a tower and I dropped that spanner that we spoke about before and it landed on top of a cavity or you know, an item and caused damage, does my public liability insurance cover that? And the answer, Steve, and I'll let you answer it, would be no, correct?
No, if you're working, if you're negligent and you drop something, are you talking about the spanner?
Yeah. So if you drop the spanner,
for a product damage, that's something that belongs to you. Yeah, that wouldn't be covered. It's a negligence policy. It's a liability policy.
Yeah. and certainly doesn't cover when somebody asked the question, does it cover theft of my equipment? Well, the answer is no.
No.
No, it doesn't cover that. That's not PL insurance. That's not what it is. And again, for that question to be asked sort of tells me that there has been a bit of confusion around what actually the policy is. Now, I think, Steve, I've sort of summarised with so many of the questions. I'm sorry, because some of them are so long, pages and pages and pages, and I'm trying to skip across them all and draw some common threads. Maybe we can just open it up and take a few questions, because we are running out of time.
Yeah.
And we're over. So I will ask you, though, we've got a few hands still up. Graham, is your hand still up from before? Have you got another question?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to take my hand out.
No, it's all right.
You go ahead. Thanks very much.
Okay. All right. Now, Peter Schrader, can you see other hands up? I think Craig Johnson might have a question. I've just got a hand up with a number.
Three times he's asked a question. So.
Okay, I can't see it on my screen. I can just see a hand, and it doesn't tell me who it is. So.
Well, so the first person who had the hand up was Chris Chapman, VK3QB. So Chris, you go.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Thanks, Stephen. It sounds a lot like the word negligence is really important. So activities like climbing towers to do maintenance, any of that sort of stuff, if the club has not considered things like working at heights or riggers certificates or safety harnesses or any of that sort of stuff, then negligence would come into play and you would likely not be covered. Would that be a fair interpretation?
Oh, Chris. Yeah. Your scenario is a little bit different though, because negligence. Yeah, negligence is in this respect, because in this respect, I'm looking at something now, right? So you look at the insurance clause. The negligence emanates from personal injury, property damage that occurs. Okay, so if you cause personal injury to somebody else, okay, or property damage to somebody else's property out of your negligence, then it would be covered.
So it would or wouldn't?
Would be covered.
Would be covered.
Yeah.
Can I just check that, Steve? Like, if it is a licensed activity, and I want to draw the conclusion here to a car. So if you drive a car unlicensed, my understanding is your insurance won't respond, because a condition of your policy is you must be licensed to drive a car. And I now want to come back to the tower. So if it's a licensed activity that's necessary to climb a tower and work at heights, and you have disregarded that, and you climb that tower, and as a consequence of that, there is damage to either personally or property. And I think that's where Chris was going, because.
Okay, sorry. You're right. Sorry, I took it wrong, Chris. It depends, I guess, what's in the conditions of the policy, because you cannot break the law to actually do something. Okay,
correct.
The law takes precedent here, but it sometimes it depends how, and this is where it comes down to the technical level, where some things are allowed through and it goes to the highest level, and some things are not. So I would suggest if you're breaking the law to do something, then no. The other thing, when you do look at that as well, if something happens when you, so we mentioned it earlier, Steve from Hams, was there's also, if somebody gets injured as well, there's also a stat liability exposure where the club could be sued in respect to that, because there's some stat liability law. So there are multiple things that come out of this climbing activity if something does go wrong. Plus, there's obviously the death or some fatal injury. But you're right. Yeah, sorry, I'd gone off. But does that kind of answer your question? Law would come first to me. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, it does. So I think I'm reading that or hearing that very much as it's a case of be safe and be conservative. So if you're going to go up towers, make sure you comply with what a commercial organisation would require. as Steve Kennedy described earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So thanks, Chris. So we've got a few other questions, so we have to do move on. So sorry if
Yep.
I don't mean to hurry people up, but Irene Van Ekris is number 2.
Thank you. This is VK2VAN calling. Do you copy?
Hello, we do.
All good.
We're here.
Please
Very
proceed.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm from the Blue Mountains Amateur Radio Club. My question is regarding our repeater site. Our repeater manager has asked if something happens with our repeat. People who are on that site, it is not our site. Does that policy cover us? I'll repeat the question. We
Yes,
have a
please.
repeater on another site. It is not our site. If something happens to our repeater, perhaps it causes a fire and damage to that building, or perhaps damage or injury to persons on that site, does our insurance policy cover that?
If it emanates from a negligent aspect, you could have a situation where lightning
Well,
strikes.
that's a yes or a no.
Yes, yes. So, but if it's out of, if what you got to think of here is if the incident occurred from negligence of the club, okay, whether it's something you own, you know, on the Blue Mountain somewhere else, it doesn't really matter. That belongs to you. You're responsible for that. Okay, then you are responsible for that. Then they would look at it as a negligence issue. And that's what the insurance company would decide to say, are you negligent? Are you not?
And so if we're negligent, our insurance policy covers us for being negligent.
Yeah, if you're negligent, that's what it's there for. If you've done something negligent, then that's what it's there for.
And
Okay.
you said earlier it only applied to commercial sites. I think this is relevant to Irene's question.
Yeah, our site, it's an old rural fire brigade site that is now going to be leased by a school. So this is why they're interested in our insurance policy.
So is that a commercial site? Because that actually was discussed earlier. It seemed that the underwriter would only cover commercial sites.
It didn't seem to. It said about installing on commercial sites.
It's been there for
No,
like.
Sorry,
If I could just interrupt there. That by commercial site means you have to comply with the commercial site operator's conditions. If you don't, then that's a bit of an issue. We'll have to move on. Sorry, people, because we are well over time. Craig Johnston, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Craig Johnston, City of Brisbane Radio Society. I just want to circle back on the field days thing and perhaps ask it from a slightly different angle, which was, I think I heard earlier that Scott mentioned that someone, either Scott or Stephen mentioned that field days had come up and been understood to be an activity that amateur radio clubs do. So maybe just asking the question the other way, in all the discussions, has there been any objection from the underwriter or concern from the underwriter about field days? Because we did find that there was actually nowhere really on the application form to say what you do. There were some specific questions that were answered, but none of those were about field days. And well, I guess to me, field days are a key part of amateur radio, so by definition included in my mind. But yeah, was there ever any suggestion that they were not included, is my question.
That's correct. I go with that, Craig. From my perspective, I submitted the application form to the underwriters, give them a number of websites to look at. And that's where you go, okay, then application form, there's the information. These are what different clubs do. You just do a random amount of clubs and you go, okay, this is what they're doing. No, nobody's mentioned it. The only thing they brought up and was the introduction was the events. And capping the events
and the number of people,
and the number of people. So there's obviously been some consideration in the background that there are going to be these events.
Okay, thank you.
And again,
so thanks.
And again, can I just say that because it's Australia-wide coverage, obviously, a field day can be anywhere.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, just clarify that. Pete, sorry, keep going.
Okay, no, and the last questioner, and we will have to close this off because Scott needs to get on a plane, is Dennis Brown. You're next.
Thank you, Dennis Brown, VK6AKRWA VHF Grit. Can you tell me, please, the clause number where it states, where it talks about the matter of installation on commercial towers or similar wording, please? I haven't been able to find it in my copy of the PDS. Thank you.
The answer, Dennis, is no. Sorry, what clause are you talking about?
Where it talks about the reason for rejection being installation versus maintenance, I don't see any reference to that in my copy of the PDS.
It's not going to be in the PDS. It's not in the PDS at all. It was just a decision made by the underwriter. We put an application forward. They came back to us with, I think, 3 or 4 questions. And depending on how them questions come back, the underwriter either accepted or they declined.
Okay, thanks. I don't recall us, though, talking about installation versus maintenance. If anything, on our application, we would have said maintenance.
Maybe we can just have a conversation off the air, Dennis.
Okay, thank you.
I know, Dennis. Dennis, you had a couple of other questions, I think, and I did skip over them before because I felt they'd been covered in other areas. So, are you okay, Dennis, with the other areas?
I think we probably need to take that offline. The questions that I was particularly concerned about was the business of the policy. As far as I was aware, in the old days, quote unquote, the WIA was responsible for taking out the overarching policy and then recoup the costs from individual clubs. Now, if the policy costs the WIA, let's say $1,000, and you've got 100 clubs, then each of us pony up, say, $10. And that makes insurance a viable proposition. If we're now talking, $500, $600, $700, as a previous speaker has mentioned, that puts club viability, particularly for smaller clubs, at grave risk. That's probably not what we want to be doing in the current climate for AR.
I think, and we probably do need to take this offline, but I think that comment, though, is predicated on that you believe that the previous policy covered that, which it didn't. So we might take that one offline because there's a fair bit to that. And as I said to you before, the WIA did make a decision to move away from, to use that language, the overarching policy to ensure that the relationship existed between the underwriter broker through to the club directly, and the WIA was not that middleman seen because of a lot of this confusion that it was creating in the background. But Dennis, I'm happy to have a discussion with you about that as well, and perhaps with Steve online, we could do that over the next couple of days.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Just a point that we were paying roughly, I think it's $200, about $196 or something or other per annum, and now we could be faced at $600, $700 for pretty much the same thing, and that's going to push us to the wall very, very quickly.
So again, just to say, you say pretty much the same thing, and I think that's just to my point before. That's predicated on that the previous policy did cover it, and I don't believe it did. But again, we'll go through that, Dennis, offline.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so the only other thing that I've picked up from the chat, and we will only have a few more minutes for this, is the notion of additional coverage for additional insurance products. So the misconception with some people was that contents would be covered by this policy, which it's not. It's public liability. So Steve, a general question to you is if a club was to explore other insurance products, either with another broker or with yourself, would you be open to talking to them?
Yeah, I'm already talking to Sam. Definitely. Look, even if you've got a relationship with a local broker, I suggest you do have that conversation. I as far as I understand now, it's some pretty expensive gear, and definitely you need it covered.
So I guess that the other thing I want to emphasise is the WIA is not forcing any club or any individual to take up a product with Gibson Sure. That is not what we're about. We are trying to facilitate a decent product offered by Gibson Sure to get the best possible coverage and provide the maximum protection for our clubs. Scott, do you have any objection to that? Sort of, you agree with that?
Well, to be honest, it was probably going to be my closing comment, other than,
Sorry,
I think what's important through all this is it's really positive that we're all having these discussions, because, look, to be honest, I would be horrified, and so would be the board, if in fact that there was an incident and a policy didn't respond. I mean, part of having all these conversations, however difficult they are, is just to make sure that absolutely everybody is aware of the activities. They're correctly described. The insurer is aware of those, and then clubs are aware of their obligations, but they're aware of risks. And insurance, Stephen, not taking any words out of your mouth, but it's a tough business, and you never know if insurance will respond until you make that claim, and you just hope you get back that positive response.
Yeah, correct.
And the insurance market globally is a troublesome market, and has been for many, many years, on the back of, natural disasters around the world. What's happened in professional indemnity, when you look at, from a bushfire perspective, from the cladding perspective across Australia, and you say, well, how does that affect us? Well, it does, because insurers have suffered billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of losses over the last couple of years, and they are certainly in the market today of trying to recoup some of those losses, but also to lose or to push away risks that they just believe that they don't need to take. Steve, is there anything to wrap up from your side?
Just the one thing going along that line, Scott, I'll tell you, and I'm not sure if everybody's aware of this, Australia is number 2 in the world for litigation. America is number 1, Australia is number 2. America's got 360 million people to pay them claims. Australia's got less than 30 million. And a lot of them claims are in Victoria. So it's that, and we're all paying for it. Unfortunately, guys, I find it tough just trying to place risk at the moment. It's very difficult. Place stuff into London, difficult.
Yeah.
Difficult stuff. But yeah, anyway, guys, nice to catch up with all you guys. And if anybody does want to have a chat, I will say, I think that when you can grab hold of me, I'm always happy to have a conversation about insurance and radio, and I'm always happy to learn something new, which I think I've learned a lot over the last couple of months. So thank all you guys.
Well, I think it's also fair to say, Steve, for thanks for being patient with us. We can't be the easiest customers. We can't be the easiest customers in the world.
That's okay.
Yeah. Look, thank you, Stephen, just on behalf of the WIA. Look, I know it's been a troublesome journey, and I know, though, in the background you'll continue to do your best, talking to other underwriters and just trying to understand, the future as well, what it means for us. And, I guess I know money is important, and we certainly don't want to push premiums up, but what's really important is we have coverage where coverage is needed. And I think that's the key takeaway. So look, thank you everybody for participating. It's really nice to do that, actually. I think it's the first time, certainly in my tenure, I don't know beforehand, but we've had all the presidents and clubs together like this, and it's nice to have these conversations. It really is. And again, please just reach out to Stephen directly, or certainly myself or one of the board members if you want to chat through any part of this. So look, thank you everybody. Have a great evening. Thanks for attending.
And just one more question for all the presidents and secretaries. If you think this sort of session's been useful and would like to have a more regular catch up with the board, please let us know.
Okay. Thanks everybody. I'm getting on a flight.
Yes. Safe travels, Scott.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Happy to stay on if anyone's got any more questions in discussion. Scott's got to go, but I'm happy to hang around. And we've got Chris and we've got Steve as well online as well, who come forward. Well, it's quiet out there, so we're doing a good job, Chris and Steve, eh?
Someone raised a hand, I noticed.
Who was that? Who was that? Sorry.
VK7EV.
It's from the man from Reist. Go ahead.
Will VK6AKR Dennis, will a transcript of this proceeding be available to us? Over.
I'll see how we go. It does do a transcript, but whether it interprets our words and expressions and nuances and whether we swore a lot, we'll see how it goes. I'll see if I can extract it. Because it has been recorded, and Teams is pretty clever in that you can do some text translation, but I'll see how if it made any sense.
It works really well. You try it, you'll see.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Peter. Yeah, even the audio file would be good. Thanks.
Yeah, well, look, the recording we can make available if you think that's useful. Unfortunately, I think because I'm on a 4G connection here, and Scott was on his phone as well. I think maybe we were a bit throttled by mobile connections.
That seemed to be
Peter,
what was
it's
affecting us most.
4BZ here.
What do you want?
Oh, come on, mate. Seriously. Hey, thank you for all of that. And yeah, the idea of having people getting together more frequently would be good. I'm actually by phone from Sydney at the moment because that's where I am. But no, I really appreciate that, and thanks very much. But we will be going back to Stephen with some more questions, I think, particularly with the car boot sales. But anyway, thank you for all that. Much appreciated, mate.
No worries. Just an important, for those who do hanging on, it's very important that you are upfront and honest with the broker. So like you do with your car insurance, if you have done modifications to your car, don't tell your insurer, have an accident, and the insurer says, well, you did that, we didn't know about that, they can deny your claim. It's very much the same sort of thing in this circumstance. So be very, very upfront and honest.
And we've also got VK2XZ. If you'd want to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, VK6XZ. Can a transcript of the questions or the meeting chat be made available as well?
I'll do my best to extract it out of Teams. Yeah,
that'd be great. Thank you.
But certainly, if you've got any questions or email, just email us. No problem.
Pete, is there going to be I thought the full video was going to be made available to clubs to show to their own members. Like, was that not part of it?
Oh, we'll see how we go, Chris. I'm not sure how that's going to work. In fact, what I'll do now is I'm going to stop recording because sometimes the files can get a bit too big. Right, so we're not recording now. So anything